Have you ever been humiliated because of your appearance? Have you ever felt the weight of prejudice, the arrogance of someone who looked you up and down and decided that you didn't deserve respect? Some people think they can judge others just by what they see. But what happens when life decides to get back at you? When does destiny deliver true poetic revenge into the hands of those who have been underestimated? Today, you will discover a story that will leave you speechless. A shopping mall employee cruelly treated a customer without realizing he was making the worst mistake of his life. What happened next was a shock, a twist so powerful that no one could have predicted it, and the most impressive. Everything happened in front of dozens of people who watched up close, a perfect example of justice being done. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to be in this situation, being despised, humiliated, only to in the end show that whoever laughed last, laughed best? If you believe that the world goes around, stay with me until the end, because this story will surprise you. The mall was one of the most luxurious in the city, one of those places where every detail was planned to exude exclusivity and status. The windows sparkled, full of high-value products, employees maintained impeccable posture, and customers paraded around with bags from international brands. Everything there seemed to belong to a select group of people who fit the standard of wealth and sophistication that the place required. But that afternoon, something was about to shatter this false perfection. Among the shiny corridors, a customer entered discreetly. He was wearing a simple sweatshirt, a low cap hid part of his face, and his sneakers didn't have any flashy branding. He walked calmly, without rushing, analyzing the windows as any other person would, but he only had to take a few steps to realize that he had already attracted unwanted attention. From the other side of the store, an employee was watching him with a sharp, judgmental gaze. His eyes ran over the client's figure from top to bottom, and a slight arch of his eyebrows revealed what he was thinking. For him, that man didn't belong there. It didn't fit with the profile of the clients I normally served. And as if he needed to make this clear, he didn't hesitate to act. He approached with a forced smile, but his tone carried a slight contempt. "Sir, this store sells very expensive products. Perhaps you will find something more affordable elsewhere." The sentence came loaded with disdain. It wasn't a friendly suggestion. It was an order disguised as kindness. The employee didn't want that customer to stay there. He didn't want to waste time with someone who, in his opinion, couldn't afford to buy anything. The surrounding climate changed. Other customers noticed the interaction and exchanged looks, some surprised, others uncomfortable. Anyone paying attention felt the tension in the air of that approach. It was as if the employee had decided on his own who was or wasn't worthy of being there. And the answer came unexpectedly. The client did not change, did not show immediate anger or indignation. He just smiled slightly, a smile filled with something the employee couldn't immediately identify. It was a smile from someone who had been through situations like this before, someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. But the employee, convinced that he had ended that interaction, turned to serve another customer, completely ignoring the man's presence. She didn't bother to ask him what he wanted, didn't offer help, didn't even give him the chance to say a single word. For him, that man did not exist, and that's when destiny started to work. Shortly afterwards, another, more experienced employee noticed the customer and froze for a few seconds. His eyes widened in recognition. He discreetly nudged one of his colleagues and whispered something that made the other turn around with an expression of astonishment. In a matter of seconds, the information spread among the store employees like wildfire. The customer, that simple man, in a sweatshirt and cap, who had been ignored and practically expelled from there, wasn't just anyone. He was, in fact, someone everyone there should know. But the arrogant employee, the one who had treated him with contempt, still had no idea what a monumental mistake he had made. And that was the most interesting part of the story. Because while everyone was starting to realize what was happening, he was still oblivious to the approaching storm. Now I want to know your opinion. Have you ever been through a similar situation? Have you ever been underestimated or treated with contempt just because of your appearance? Comment below, because I read all the comments, and this story is a clear example that the world goes around. Respect should never depend on clothes, appearance, or status. But unfortunately, some people only learn this lesson the hard way. Justice may take time, but when it arrives, it comes with force. And what happened next proves exactly that. So leave your like if you also believe that no one should be judged by their appearance. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I guarantee you won't want to miss the outcome of this story. The arrogant employee thought he had everything under control, but what happened in the next few minutes completely changed his life. And when he realized who was in front of him, it was already too late. The mystery customer, the one the employee treated with disdain and tried to send away, was none other than Snoop Dogg, one of the most iconic rappers of all time, a billionaire businessman, owner of an empire that goes far beyond music. But unlike what many expect from someone with so much money and influence, Snoop has always preferred a simpler style. No fancy suits or shiny jewelry full-time. He has always been the type of person who values comfort, who walks with his head held high, but without needing to show off. And that's exactly what made that employee underestimate him. To him, Snoop was nothing more than someone without money, trying to get into a place where he didn't belong. He didn't recognize the rapper's face, didn't notice the familiar tone of voice, or even pay attention to the striking presence of one of the biggest names in music. In his mind, it was all about appearance. Simple sweatshirt, low cap, calm demeanor. For the employee, this meant only one thing: someone who shouldn't be there. But what he didn't know was that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, a mistake that would not only cost him dearly, but would also serve as an example for everyone around him. Snoop noticed the look of contempt as soon as he entered. He had experienced this before. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to judge him based on his appearance, and unfortunately, it probably wouldn't be the last. Prejudice, arrogance, and the way some people feel superior just for working in a luxurious environment were nothing new to him. But that didn't mean he was willing to accept that kind of treatment. Still, he remained calm. Instead of leaving, as the employee clearly wanted him to do, he decided to continue looking at the products. He looked around the windows, analyzed some items, and after a few minutes pointed to a clock displayed behind the glass. A rare, limited edition model that cost more than many earned in a year. The employee's reaction was immediate. He laughed lightly, crossed his arms, and shook his head before responding with a tone of voice full of irony. "This is one of our most exclusive items. Very few people in the world have one of these. Maybe we can show you something more affordable." The message was clear. The employee did not believe, not for a second, that the man in front of him could afford something like that. To him, he was just another curious person, someone who wanted to see an expensive object, but who would never have enough money to take it home. And it was at that moment that something interesting started to happen. Other employees, those who had already recognized Snoop Dogg, began to look at each other. Some seemed nervous, others were in disbelief at how the situation was unfolding. One of them tried to discreetly intervene, approaching the arrogant employee and whispering something in his ear, but the answer came quickly and impatiently. "I know what I'm doing. You can leave it to me." He was not willing to listen to anyone. I was sure he was right. For him, that man was nothing more than a random customer who shouldn't be there. And therefore, he did not deserve respect. He did not deserve attention, much less the right to be treated in the same way as others. But little by little, the environment began to change. The buzz increased. Some customers who were nearby began to notice that something was wrong. A woman looked at the employee and then at the man in the hoodie, trying to understand why he was being treated that way. A young man took his cell phone out of his pocket and began discreetly filming. Tension was in the air, and it was at that moment that the employee noticed something strange. He started to notice the stares. He started to notice that some people were reacting differently than he expected. One of the store managers appeared out of nowhere, hurriedly walking towards the scene. His expression was a mixture of despair and disbelief. He stopped for a second, observing the situation, and when he finally understood what was happening, his face lost color. The employee didn't understand at the time, but Snoop noticed. He knew exactly what was happening. The manager took a deep breath, looked directly at the employee and said something that made the superior expression disappear from his face in a matter of seconds. "Do you know who he is?" Silence took over the environment. The employee blinked a few times, confused, without understanding the reason for that question. He looked at Snoop again, trying to find some answer, but his mind refused to believe what was about to happen. The manager moved even closer, swallowing hard before speaking again. "This is Snoop Dogg." The words echoed in the air. For a second, the employee stood completely still. The world seemed to stop. The penny dropped like lightning, and it was at that moment that he realized he had made an irreversible mistake. The employee thought he was in control of the situation, but what came next was a turnaround that he could never have imagined. The employee who mistreated Snoop Dogg was young, but he already carried with him an arrogance typical of someone who feels above others. He didn't own the store, nor did he hold a position of great importance, but he walked around the establishment as if he owned the place himself. For him, the job wasn't just about selling products, but about selecting who was or wasn't worthy of being there. His sharp gaze analyzed each customer, and within seconds he already formed an opinion. If someone didn't dress the right way, didn't demonstrate high status, or didn't look rich enough, he simply dismissed that person, treating them with contempt and impatience. And that's exactly what he did when Snoop Dogg walked in. He only saw a man in a hoodie and a cap, someone who, in his eyes, was not worth his time or attention. In his mind, people like that didn't buy anything, they just asked questions and wasted his day. He had dealt with other clients of this type before and was not willing to waste any more time. So when Snoop Dogg showed interest in the limited edition watch, the employee's impatience was evident. He crossed his arms, raised an eyebrow and let out a discreet sigh, but full of contempt. His posture said it all. He had already decided that this man didn't have the money to pay for it, so he didn't even bother to treat him with respect. "Can you really pay for this?" The question was loaded with irony, accompanied by a cynical look that made it clear what he was thinking. It wasn't a legitimate doubt, it was a provocation. The employee wanted to make it very clear that in his opinion, Snoop could not afford that watch. Other store employees, who had already recognized the rapper, became tense. They knew exactly who he was and the size of the mistake that was being made. One of them tried to intervene again, but was ignored. The arrogant employee was convinced he knew what he was doing, and the humiliation didn't stop there. The clerk took a step back and looked around as if he was about to call someone from security to get Snoop out. He wanted other customers to understand what was happening. I wanted to reinforce the idea that that man didn't have the money to be there, that he shouldn't have even entered the store. He wanted to embarrass Snoop Dogg, make him feel out of place, like he was in the wrong place. Silence took over the environment. Some people nearby stopped to watch, curious to see how it would end. The employee seemed confident that he was in control of the situation. After all, in his mind, he had dealt with hundreds of clients before and knew exactly who had money and who didn't. For him, that man in the sweatshirt was just an ordinary person, someone who was just there to look, maybe even to cause trouble. What he didn't know was that he was about to experience the worst moment of his career. Snoop Dogg, until that moment, remained calm. He had been in situations like this before. He had already been judged by his appearance on other occasions. But that didn't mean he would accept this kind of treatment without reacting. He looked directly into the employee's eyes, and instead of responding with anger or indignation, he just smiled. A light smile, almost imperceptible, but which carried a deep meaning. Anyone who knew Snoop knew that smile meant one thing: someone was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. But before continuing, tell me one thing. Have you ever been through a situation like this? Have you ever been treated with contempt by someone who judged you based on your appearance? Comment below, because I want to know if you have ever felt this same indignation, and if you believe that respect comes before anything, leave your like, because what happens after that is unbelievable. The employee still had no idea, but he was about to regret every word. The employee, still convinced he was dealing with someone unimportant, continued to act arrogantly. For him, that man dressed in a sweatshirt and cap was nothing more than a curious person who entered the wrong store. His posture remained the same, cold, distant, and full of superiority. He had no idea what mistake he was making, nor who was really in front of him. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, remained calm. He had been in situations like this before, people who judged him by his appearance, who felt they could treat him with contempt just because he wasn't sporting jewelry or designer clothes. But what that employee didn't know was that Snoop didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His presence there said it all, and the way he reacted to that situation showed that he was about to turn the tide. He pointed to the limited edition watch that was displayed in an adjacent window. A rare model, manufactured in limited quantities, used by some of the most influential people in the world. Its elegant design, its exclusivity, and above all, its exorbitant value made it an item that few could purchase. And that's exactly what caught Snoop Dogg's attention. But the employee laughed, a discreet, almost mocking laugh, before shaking his head and responding in an even more condescending way. This model is exclusive to special customers. He spoke with a tone of voice that mixed impatience and irony, as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. In his mind, that man who was there, dressed simply, could never afford such a valuable item. He didn't even bother to offer more information, to ask if the customer wanted to see another model or if he wanted to know more about that watch. He had already decided that the sale wouldn't happen, so he didn't even try to be polite. Silence took over the room for a few seconds. What once seemed like just an ordinary conversation between a customer and a salesperson now caught the attention of everyone around. Some customers who were in the store began to notice that something strange was happening. Across the room, a couple looked towards Snoop Dogg and then at the employee, exchanging looks of surprise. One of the customers, who was trying on a pair of shoes, stopped what he was doing to take a closer look. And then the murmurs began. This guy has no idea who is in front of him. Did he really not recognize it? My God, he's screwed. The voices were discreet, but enough so that the arrogant employee began to realize something was wrong. He looked around, noticing that some people were whispering and looking in his direction. But still, he didn't understand what was happening. For him, that was just an exaggerated reaction by some people. He had no idea that the situation was about to spiral completely out of his control. And then, one of the store's most experienced employees quickly approached, visibly nervous. He tried to interrupt the conversation, even opening his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the arrogant employee himself. "I know what I'm doing," he said impatiently, without even looking at his colleague. The other employee hesitated for a moment. He knew this situation was becoming a disaster, but he didn't know how to stop it. The problem was that by then it was too late. Snoop Dogg was still there, silent, analyzing everything. His gaze attentively observed every detail of the situation. He saw the looks on the customers' faces, felt the tension in the air, and noticed how the employee continued to not recognize his mistake. And it was at that moment that he decided to test how far this would go. "Okay," said Snoop Dogg, pointing to his watch again, "but I would like to see this model up close." The employee rolled his eyes, crossed his arms, and let out another sigh of impatience. "This watch is very expensive. There's no point in wanting to see it if you're not going to buy it." Once again, he insisted on belittling Snoop Dogg, on treating him as someone worthless. But this time, he was about to cross a threshold that he could no longer take back. The tension grew with every second. The employee still thought he was in control, but the truth was that the scenario had already completely changed. More people started paying attention. The whispers became more frequent. Customers looked at Snoop Dogg with respect, but at the employee with incredulity. And it was then that the turning point began to take shape. The store manager, who had been in the office until then, received an alert that something was happening in the main hall. He hurriedly left, and as soon as he saw the scene, he froze in place. His eyes widened, and for a second, he was unresponsive. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He approached slowly, trying to understand how it happened. How could one of your employees make such a huge mistake? How could he treat Snoop Dogg like that? Silence took over the environment. The employee, who had not yet noticed the manager's presence, continued with his air of superiority. "Look, sir, I don't think we have anything here for you. Maybe another store can help you better." And it was at that moment that the manager decided to intervene. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the room like a blade. The employee turned around, a little surprised, but maintained the same posture. "Nothing much. I'm just trying to avoid wasting time. This man does not have the profile of our clients." The manager's face turned red with indignation. He looked at Snoop Dogg, who remained silent, observing the scene with the same calm look, but full of meaning. "Do you have any idea who he is?" The employee frowned, still not understanding. "Of course I know. It's just a—" He stopped mid-sentence. It was at that moment that everything finally made sense. He saw the scared looks of the other employees. He saw the customers looking at him as if they were waiting for the moment when he would realize his mistake. He saw the manager's expression, who now seemed torn between shock and anger. And most importantly, he saw Snoop Dogg, still there, looking right at him, waiting for his reaction. The penny dropped like lightning. The employee lost his breath for a moment. He felt his body go cold. Her mind began to replay everything he had said, every arrogant word, every dismissive gesture. He realized, too late, that he had made an irreversible mistake. The employee had not yet realized the true extent of the error he was making. In his mind, he was still in control of the situation. He still believed he was just pushing away someone who didn't fit the standard of customers in that store. His tone of voice was still full of disdain. His posture was still the same, superior and impatient. But all that was about to change drastically. As he tried to get rid of Snoop Dogg, one of the other employees, who had recognized the rapper from the beginning, decided it was time to act. Discreetly, he left the counter and went to the manager's office. The situation was getting out of control, and he knew he needed to intervene before it was too late. However, the arrogant employee did not know this. He didn't even notice that some customers were discreetly filming, that the whispers were getting louder, and that the tension in the atmosphere was palpable. He was so focused on humiliating that customer that he didn't notice the shocked looks, the incredulous expressions of the people around him. And then he decided to take the situation one step further. He turned to one of the store's security guards, pointed at Snoop Dogg and said in an authoritative tone, "Please escort this man to the exit." The silence that followed was almost deafening. The employees who knew who Snoop Dogg was exchanged nervous glances. Some customers widened their eyes, shocked by what they were witnessing. The whispers grew more intense. The security guard, a tall, strong man, frowned, seeming to hesitate. He also recognized the rapper immediately, but before he could react, a voice cut through the room like a blade. What the hell is going on here? Everyone turned around at the same time. The store manager suddenly appeared, walking quickly towards the center of the commotion. His look was a mixture of disbelief and anger. He quickly scanned the situation, trying to understand how it had gotten to this point. He looked at Snoop Dogg, who stood there calm, but with a look that made it clear that he knew exactly what was happening. The manager then turned his attention to the employee, who was now beginning to feel a chill run up his spine. "Can someone explain to me what's going on?" The employee, still unaware of the impending disaster, crossed his arms and shrugged. "I'm just doing my job. This man clearly can't afford to buy anything here, so I thought it best to prevent him from wasting our time." The manager froze for a second. He blinked a few times as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. And then, in a voice full of tension, he asked, "Do you know who he is?" The employee frowned. "What?" The manager swallowed hard, took a step forward, and looked directly into the employee's eyes. "Do you know who this man is?" The official hesitated. For the first time, his air of superiority began to waver. He looked at Snoop Dogg once more, but still hadn't connected the dots. The manager pursed his lips as if he was about to explode, and then said, loud and clear for everyone to hear, "This is Snoop Dogg." The impact was immediate. The employee froze, the color drained from his face. He blinked repeatedly, as if his mind was trying to process the information. He looked around and saw customers staring at him, some with expressions of pure shock, others already holding back laughter. He looked at his co-workers, who were watching him as if he had just committed an unforgivable crime. His heart started to race. A lump formed in his throat. But none of that was worse than looking at Snoop Dogg and realizing he was smiling. Not a smile of satisfaction, not a smile of anger, but a smile that said, clearly, "You just destroyed your own career." The employee tried to say something, but the words didn't come out. He was completely unresponsive. The manager ran a hand over his face, clearly frustrated. He knew this mistake could cost the store dearly. "Tell me that didn't happen," he muttered, before turning to Snoop Dogg, now trying to salvage what was left of the establishment's dignity. "Sir, I apologize. That was a terrible mistake. This behavior does not represent our store." Snoop Dogg kept his gaze steady. He didn't need to say anything. The manager knew the situation was completely out of control. But what happened next? This is something no one expected. The silence in the environment was absolute. Everyone was trying to process what had just happened. The employee, who minutes before had been in control of the situation, was now completely still, pale, with his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open. It was as if his brain was trying to find a way to reverse what it had done, but there was no way out. He knew he had crossed a line from which he could not go back. Snoop Dogg was still there, calm, in no rush. His gaze analyzed every detail around him. He could feel the tension in the air. He could hear the whispers of the customers who were watching everything. And most of all, he could see the desperation in the eyes of the employee who had treated him with disdain. But unlike what many would do in that situation, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand respect in anger. He didn't even need to impose himself. He knew that true respect is not demanded. It is proven. It was then that he decided to teach the lesson that employee would never forget. With a calm movement, he pointed to the window where the store's most expensive products were displayed. The same place that minutes before he had been prevented from accessing because the employee believed he did not have money to buy anything there. "I want to see all the products in this collection," he said, his voice firm but calm. The entire store held its breath. The employee, still paralyzed, blinked a few times, trying to understand if he had heard correctly. He looked at the manager, as if expecting some instruction, but the manager just crossed his arms and watched. It was now too late to try to fix the situation. Another employee, who didn't want to make the same mistake as his colleague, hurried to open the window. He picked up one of the most expensive watches in the store and handed it to Snoop Dogg. The rapper held the item carefully, analyzing the details, while absolute silence dominated the environment. "This one is good," he said, before looking at the seller, who was now shaking. "But I want more." The entire store was in shock. The manager's eyes widened. The employees began to exchange nervous glances. Nobody could believe what was about to happen. "Take every model in the luxury line," said Snoop Dogg. The employee holding the key to the window swallowed hard, but complied. He began to remove all the watches one by one and place them on the counter. Within minutes, there was a small fortune there, laid out before the eyes of everyone present. Snoop Dogg looked at the items and smiled. "I'll take them all." The shock was immediate. The employee, who minutes before had treated him as if he were just anyone, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His body went rigid. His mind was still trying to find a way to escape that situation, but there was no way out. The customer he had humiliated, who he had treated as someone inferior, not only had the money to buy the watch, he was taking the store's entire luxury collection. Payment was made there, on the spot. A black card was placed on the counter, and the employees handling the transaction made sure to act as quickly as possible. They knew that this was a critical moment, that any mistake could make the situation even worse. When everything was finalized, the bags were handed over to Snoop Dogg, and he then did what everyone was waiting for. He slowly turned to the arrogant employee, looked directly into his eyes, and released the sentence that would change everything. "Treat everyone with respect, because you never know who is serving you." Those words echoed through the room like a well-aimed blow. The employee felt each syllable like a crushing weight. There was no answer to that. There was no excuse. There was no justification. He knew he had failed. The store manager, who until that moment had remained silent, took a deep breath and made his decision. He looked at the employee and said without hesitation, "You're fired." The impact was immediate. The employee opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His face turned red. His eyes began to blink rapidly, as if he was trying to process the new reality. He looked around, but no one there would defend him. He was completely alone. "Take your things and leave," ordered the manager, without showing any patience. The employee hesitated, but knew there was nothing more to be done. He lowered his head, slowly turned around, and started walking towards the exit, feeling everyone's eyes on him. The entire store watched as he walked away, now without the air of superiority he displayed minutes before. His arrogance was gone, replaced by shame and regret. But it was already too late. Snoop Dogg picked up his bags, looked around and noticed that some people were still trying to process everything they had just seen. He gave a slight smile, lifted his chin, and left the store as calmly as he had entered. "Now tell me, do you think this employee deserved this lesson? If it were you in Snoop Dogg's place, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have reacted differently? Comment below because I want to know your opinion. I read all the comments, and this story proves that karma can move quickly. The employee left the store with heavy steps, his face red, his hands shaking, and his mind in complete despair. He avoided looking around, but he felt the eyes on him, as if each person present was mentally recording that moment. He knew he would never forget that day, and worse, I knew the others wouldn't forget either. As soon as he walked through the store's door, the whispers of customers turned into a wave of more audible whispers. Some were still in shock, others were trying to hide their incredulous laughter. There were also those who did not hide their satisfaction, because, for many there, seeing arrogance being punished in that way was a scene worthy of a movie. Amidst the confusion, one detail went unnoticed by the former employee, but it would change the course of that story forever. From the beginning of the humiliation, From the moment he tried to expel Snoop Dogg, some customers had already started recording. In times of social media, nothing goes unnoticed. And at that exact moment, as he left the store trying to maintain some dignity, videos were already being posted on the internet. The title of one of them said it all: "Employee humiliates customer without knowing he was Snoop Dogg and gets very upset." And that's when the situation took on gigantic proportions. The first comments appeared within minutes. People expressing their outrage, condemning prejudice, and praising the way Snoop Dogg handled everything. In a matter of hours, the video was going viral, reaching thousands of views and spreading quickly across social media. The store, which until then was known only for its exclusivity and luxury products, was now the center of a global debate. The hashtag with the name of the establishment started to trend, but not in the way the company would like. Thousands of people demanded explanations, asked for positions, and swore never to set foot there again. The manager, who had previously only been concerned with fixing the situation within the store, now found himself facing a much bigger problem. The press started calling, influencers commented on the case, and even other celebrities joined the discussion. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: how could an employee act with so much prejudice and contempt without anyone stopping him? Inside the store, the atmosphere was one of absolute chaos. Employees whispered among themselves, trying to understand how it had escalated so quickly. Some were tense, fearing for their jobs, while others were just trying to avoid getting involved in the controversy. But everyone knew that this was a decisive moment for the company's image. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, went on with his life as if nothing had happened. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to demand anything. The simple fact that he remained calm and handled the situation the way he did was enough to turn it into a perfect example of poetic justice. He proved an important point without having to give speeches. The employee's arrogance, the way he judged someone based on their appearance alone, and the immediate punishment he received, all of this served as a valuable lesson. The employee, now unemployed, quickly felt the weight of the consequences. His name began to circulate on social media, and some people even found his profile, filling his posts with critical comments. He tried to defend himself. He tried to say he didn't do anything wrong, but no one was interested in hearing excuses. The images spoke for themselves. Most impressively, as the story continued to gain traction online, the store was desperately trying to control the damage. An official note was published, stating that the former employee's behavior did not reflect the company's values, and that measures were being taken to reinforce team training. But the public was not so easily convinced. The big truth is that this story moved a lot of people because it wasn't just about Snoop Dogg. It was about how many times do ordinary people go through similar situations every day? How many times has someone been treated with disdain in a store, in a restaurant, anywhere, just because they didn't seem to fit in that environment? And the most important question, how many of these people had the chance to turn things around and show who they really are? This story teaches us a powerful lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance. The world goes around, and respect must always come before judgment. Because at the end of the day, you never know who you're dealing with. The world is full of stories like this, and I'm going to bring each one to you. If you've made it this far, it's because this story really grabbed you. And this just proves how important it is to talk about respect, about how appearances can be deceiving, and about how the world turns around. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this twist? Did the employee deserve this lesson, or do you think they should be given a second chance? Comment below, because I read all the comments and want to know your opinion. And to show that you followed this story until the end, comment here. Respect is worth more than luxury. Let's fill the comments with this phrase to reinforce this important message. If you liked this video, leave a like. because this really helps the channel to continue bringing stories like this to you. And if you are not yet registered, sign up now and activate the bell, because I guarantee you won't want to miss the next stories to come. And before leaving, click on the next video that is appearing on the screen now, because there is another incredible story that you need to know. See you there.